Marine Corporal Sarah Martinez never imagined that a routine patrol through the dusty streets of Fallujah would change her life forever. The 23-year-old from Phoenix had been deployed to Iraq for 8 months, serving as a communications specialist with the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. Her unit was stationed at Camp Fallujah, conducting daily operations to secure the volatile city that had become a symbol of the Iraq War's most dangerous battlegrounds. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Sarah woke before dawn, checked her equipment, and joined her squad for the pre-mission briefing. Intelligence reports indicated increased insurgent activity in the industrial district, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary for Fallujah. The city had been a constant source of conflict since the invasion began, with American forces facing fierce resistance from well-organized insurgent groups who knew every alley, rooftop, and hiding spot. Sarah's team consisted of 12 Marines, including Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson, a veteran of 2 previous deployments who had become like an older brother to her. Their mission was straightforward: establish checkpoints along Highway 10, search vehicles for weapons or explosives, and gather intelligence on insurgent movements. It was dangerous work, but Sarah had grown accustomed to the constant threat that hung over every operation in this war-torn city. As their convoy of 3 Humvees rolled through the base gates, Sarah couldn't shake an unusual feeling of unease. She had learned to trust her instincts during her time in Iraq, but she pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on her radio equipment and communication protocols. The streets were unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning, with fewer civilians visible than normal. Shop owners, who typically opened early, kept their metal shutters closed, and children who usually waved at passing American vehicles were nowhere to be seen. The first checkpoint was established without incident at an intersection near the Euphrates River. Sarah positioned herself in the lead vehicle, maintaining radio contact with headquarters while her fellow Marines began stopping and searching cars. The local population seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. Even the interpreters who worked with her unit appeared more anxious than usual, constantly scanning the surrounding buildings with worried expressions. 3 hours into the operation, everything changed in an instant. Sarah was adjusting her radio frequency when the first explosion shattered the morning calm. A roadside bomb hidden beneath debris near their position detonated with devastating force. The blast wave threw Sarah against the side of her Humvee, and the acrid smell of smoke and burning metal filled her nostrils. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear Staff Sergeant Thompson shouting orders, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. Muzzle flashes sparked from rooftops, windows, and doorways as insurgents launched a coordinated ambush. Sarah instinctively grabbed her rifle and sought cover behind the damaged Humvee, her training taking over despite the chaos surrounding her. The attack had been carefully planned, with the insurgents using the checkpoint location to their advantage, turning what should have been a secure position into a deadly trap. The firefight intensified rapidly as more insurgents joined the battle. Sarah could see her fellow Marines taking positions behind concrete barriers and vehicles, returning fire at an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The insurgents used the urban environment expertly, appearing from one location to fire several rounds before disappearing into the maze of buildings and alleyways. Radio chatter filled with urgent calls for backup and medical assistance as the ambush continued to unfold with terrifying precision and intensity. The ambush had been meticulously planned, and Sarah quickly realized her unit had walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. Insurgents had positioned themselves in a horseshoe formation around the checkpoint, creating overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. Every time one of her fellow Marines attempted to advance or retreat, bullets would immediately rain down from multiple directions, forcing them to remain pinned behind whatever cover they could find. Sarah pressed herself against the rear wheel of the damaged Humvee, feeling the vehicle shake with each impact from enemy bullets. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles mixed with the deeper thud of machine gun fire, creating a symphony of violence that echoed through the narrow streets. She could see Corporal Williams about 20 feet away, blood streaming down his face from shrapnel wounds, but any attempt to reach him would mean exposing herself to deadly crossfire. Staff Sergeant Thompson's voice crackled through her radio headset. Coordinating defensive positions and calling for immediate air support, the veteran Marine moved with practiced efficiency despite the chaos, shouting encouragement to his troops while directing their fire toward the most threatening enemy positions. Sarah admired his calm leadership under pressure, but she could hear the strain in his voice as the situation grew more desperate with each passing minute. The first bullet struck Sarah in her left shoulder as she attempted to change position for a better angle of fire. The impact spun her around and knocked her to the ground, causing her rifle to skitter across the pavement. Pain shot through her body like lightning, but adrenaline kept her moving as she scrambled to retrieve her weapon. Blood soaked through her uniform, but she forced herself to focus on the immediate threat rather than her injury. Minutes later, a second bullet found its mark, striking her in the thigh and sending waves of agony through her leg. Sarah bit down hard to keep from crying out, knowing that any sound might give away her position to the insurgents who seemed to have eyes everywhere. She applied pressure to both wounds while continuing to scan for targets, her training overriding the natural instinct to seek medical attention. The firefight had been raging for nearly 2 hours when Sarah took her third hit, this time in her right arm. The bullet passed through muscle and sinew, leaving her dominant hand nearly useless. She switched her rifle to her left hand and continued firing, though her accuracy suffered significantly. The pain was becoming overwhelming, but she refused to give up, knowing that her fellow Marines were counting on every rifle in the fight. As the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the embattled Marines, Sarah found herself growing weaker with each passing hour. She had now been hit 7 times, with bullets finding their way through gaps in her body armor and striking exposed areas of her arms and legs. Each new wound made it harder to move, harder to think, and harder to maintain her fighting spirit. Yet she continued to return fire whenever possible, determined not to let her teammates down. The insurgents seemed to have an unlimited supply of ammunition and reinforcements, with fresh fighters appearing to replace those who had been killed or wounded. Sarah watched in growing dismay as her unit's ammunition supplies dwindled while the enemy maintained their relentless assault. Radio calls for reinforcement grew more urgent, but urban warfare in Fallujah meant that help could be hours away, if it came at all. By late afternoon, Sarah had been struck by bullets 10 more times, bringing the total to 17 hits. Some were grazing wounds that tore through her uniform and skin, while others were more serious injuries that left her bleeding heavily and struggling to maintain consciousness. Her body armor had stopped several rounds, but the insurgents were using armor-piercing ammunition that could penetrate even military-grade protection at close range. The world began to blur around the edges as blood loss took its toll on Sarah's body and mind. She could still hear the ongoing firefight, still see muzzle flashes from insurgent positions, but everything seemed to move in slow motion. Her fellow Marines continued fighting with desperate determination, but she could tell they were running low on ammunition and options. The situation was becoming hopeless, and everyone knew it, though nobody was willing to voice that terrible reality aloud. As darkness began to fall over Fallujah, the insurgents launched a massive final assault designed to overrun the Marine position completely. Rocket-propelled grenades exploded against concrete barriers, sending deadly fragments in all directions. Sarah watched in horror as one of the remaining Humvees burst into flames after taking a direct hit, the orange glow illuminating the battlefield with an eerie, hellish light. In the chaos of the final assault, Staff Sergeant Thompson made the agonizing decision that would haunt him for years to come. With ammunition nearly exhausted and casualties mounting, he ordered his remaining Marines to conduct a fighting withdrawal to a more defensible position 3 blocks away. The plan required moving quickly through side streets and alleyways, but Sarah was in no condition to move at the speed necessary for survival. Thompson crawled over to Sarah's position, his face grim with the weight of command decisions. She could see the pain in his eyes as he explained the situation. The unit had to move immediately, but her injuries were too severe for the rapid movement required. He promised to return for her as soon as possible, leaving her with 2 fragmentation grenades, a pistol, and what little ammunition remained in her rifle. Sarah understood the impossible position her squad leader faced. Military doctrine sometimes required leaving wounded behind to save the majority, though it went against every instinct and principle Marines held dear. She squeezed Thompson's hand weakly and told him to take care of the others, knowing that his decision was the only one that made tactical sense, even if it felt like abandonment to everyone involved. As her fellow Marines disappeared into the darkness, Sarah found herself alone in a hostile city with 17 bullet wounds and dwindling strength. The insurgents continued searching the area, calling to each other in Arabic as they moved from building to building. She could hear their footsteps getting closer, along with the occasional burst of automatic weapons fire as they cleared suspected hiding spots. Sarah dragged herself into the ruins of a nearby building that had been damaged by previous fighting. The structure provided minimal concealment, but it was better than remaining exposed in the street. She positioned herself behind a pile of rubble where she could observe the approaches while remaining hidden from casual observation. Every movement sent waves of pain through her battered body, but she forced herself to stay alert. The first night was a nightmare of pain, fear, and isolation. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, startled awake by the sound of insurgent patrols passing nearby. She could hear them talking and laughing, sometimes stopping so close to her hiding spot that she could smell their cigarette smoke. The slightest sound or movement would mean certain death, so she remained perfectly still despite the agony coursing through her body. Thirst became her most immediate concern as the hours passed. The Iraqi heat had been brutal during the day, and she had lost significant amounts of blood from her multiple wounds. Her water bottle had been damaged by shrapnel, leaving her with only a few precious drops. She tried to collect morning dew in her helmet, but the amount was insufficient to make any real difference to her deteriorating condition. By the second day, infection had set in around several of her wounds. Sarah could feel the fever building in her body, making it even harder to think clearly and stay hidden. She knew that without medical attention soon, the infections would become life-threatening, but insurgent activity around her position remained too heavy for any rescue attempt. Helicopters occasionally flew overhead, but they maintained high altitudes to avoid ground fire. Hallucinations began during the second night as her condition worsened. Sarah imagined conversations with her family back in Phoenix, vivid dreams of her childhood home, and memories of her training at Paris Island. Sometimes she forgot where she was, calling out softly for her mother before remembering her desperate situation. The line between reality and delirium became increasingly blurred as blood loss and infection took their toll. Food was non-existent, though hunger had become secondary to her other concerns. Sarah's body was beginning to shut down non-essential functions, conserving what little energy remained for basic survival. She found it increasingly difficult to maintain her grip on her weapons, and several times nearly dropped her pistol while trying to adjust her position among the rubble. Communications with the outside world were impossible since her radio had been destroyed during the initial ambush. Sarah had no way to signal her location to potential rescuers, and no way to know if anyone was even looking for her. For all she knew, her unit believed she was already dead, just another casualty in a war that seemed to have no clear end or purpose. Unknown to Sarah, her disappearance had triggered an intense search and rescue operation involving multiple military units. Staff Sergeant Thompson had filed detailed reports about her last known position, and Marine Corps intelligence analysts were working around the clock to pinpoint possible locations where she might be hiding or being held captive. The military's no man left behind principle meant that significant resources would be devoted to finding her, regardless of the risks involved. Navy SEAL Team 3, operating out of a classified forward base, received the rescue mission on Sarah's second day in hiding. The team was led by Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison, a veteran of multiple deployments who had earned a reputation for successful hostage rescues in urban environments. His team included 8 highly trained special operations personnel, each with specific skills essential for operating in hostile territory like Fallujah. Harrison studied satellite imagery and intelligence reports while planning the rescue operation. The area where Sarah was believed to be hiding was controlled by insurgents who had turned every building into a potential fortress. Conventional rescue attempts would likely result in heavy casualties and might end up killing the very person they were trying to save. The mission would require stealth, precision timing, and a significant amount of luck. The SEAL team began their approach during the early morning hours of Sarah's third day alone. They moved through the city using routes that avoided known insurgent positions, traveling through drainage tunnels and abandoned buildings whenever possible. Each team member carried specialized equipment including night vision goggles, suppressed weapons, and medical supplies that might be needed if they found Sarah alive. Sarah's condition had deteriorated significantly by this point. She was barely conscious, drifting between fevered dreams and moments of painful clarity. The infections in her wounds had spread throughout her body, and she had developed a dangerous case of sepsis that was slowly shutting down her organs. Several times during the night she thought she heard voices calling her name, but dismissed them as more hallucinations brought on by her desperate condition. The SEALs had narrowed their search to a 3-block area based on Thompson's reports and drone surveillance footage. They moved methodically from building to building, using thermal imaging equipment to detect human heat signatures while avoiding insurgent patrols. The work was painstakingly slow, as any mistake could alert the enemy to their presence and compromise the entire mission. Lieutenant Commander Harrison was beginning to worry that they were too late when his point man detected a faint heat signature in the ruins where Sarah was hiding. The reading was weak, suggesting someone in poor physical condition, but it was the first promising lead they had discovered. Harrison signaled for his team to establish a security perimeter, while he and the team medic moved closer to investigate. Sarah heard footsteps approaching her position and weakly raised her pistol, thinking that insurgents had finally discovered her hiding spot. Her vision was so blurred from fever and blood loss that she could barely make out shapes in the darkness. When a figure appeared at the edge of her hiding spot, she tried to aim her weapon but lacked the strength to hold it steady. "American! American, don't shoot!" Harrison whispered urgently in English when he saw the pistol pointed in his direction. He could immediately tell that the person hiding in the rubble was in critical condition, barely alive after days without medical attention. Moving slowly to avoid startling the injured Marine, he identified himself and his unit while the team medic prepared emergency medical supplies. The relief Sarah felt upon hearing English spoken by American forces was overwhelming. For 3 days she had been certain she would die alone in the ruins of Fallujah, forgotten by her own military and hunted by insurgents who wanted nothing more than to capture or kill her. The appearance of Navy SEALs seemed impossible, like something from a dream, but their professional demeanor and familiar equipment convinced her that rescue had finally arrived. Harrison's medic immediately began assessing Sarah's injuries while the rest of the team maintained security around their position. The number and severity of her wounds shocked even these experienced special operations personnel. 17 bullet impacts, multiple infections, severe dehydration, and obvious signs of sepsis meant that she needed immediate evacuation to a trauma center if there was any hope of saving her life. The biggest challenge now was getting Sarah out of insurgent-controlled territory without being detected. She was too weak to walk and would need to be carried, which would slow their movement significantly and make them vulnerable to attack. Harrison quickly formulated an extraction plan that would require split-second timing and coordination with helicopter support waiting outside the city. Lieutenant Commander Harrison knew that extracting Sarah from her current location would be one of the most challenging operations his team had ever attempted. The injured Marine was in critical condition and required immediate medical evacuation, but insurgent forces controlled every route out of the area. Any conventional extraction would likely result in a firefight that could kill the person they were trying to save. The SEAL medic worked quickly to stabilize Sarah's condition enough for transport. He administered IV fluids to combat her severe dehydration and gave her powerful antibiotics to fight the infections that were threatening her life. Her pulse was weak and irregular, indicating that her body was going into shock from blood loss and sepsis. Time was running out rapidly, and every minute of delay decreased her chances of survival. Harrison established radio contact with the helicopter crew waiting at the extraction point 2 miles away. The pilots were experienced in combat rescues, but they would need a clear landing zone and adequate security to safely pick up the team. Unfortunately, every potential landing site in the immediate area was either too close to insurgent positions or unsuitable for helicopter operations due to power lines and buildings. The team faced an agonizing decision: attempt to carry Sarah through 2 miles of hostile territory to reach the helicopter, or call in close air support to clear a path directly to their current position. Both options carried enormous risks, but Harrison ultimately decided that Sarah's medical condition made the longer route impossible. They would need to create their own landing zone and fight their way out if necessary. 2 team members were dispatched to reconnaissance potential helicopter landing sites while the others prepared Sarah for transport. The medic had managed to stabilize her condition temporarily, but she remained unconscious and her vital signs were still dangerously unstable. Harrison knew that any sudden movement or stress could cause her to go into complete cardiac arrest, ending the rescue mission in failure. The reconnaissance team identified a small courtyard about 4 blocks away that could accommodate a helicopter landing. The site was currently unoccupied, but insurgent forces maintained positions in surrounding buildings that would need to be neutralized before any extraction attempt. Harrison coordinated with air support to provide covering fire while his team moved Sarah to the landing zone. Moving through the war-torn streets with an unconscious casualty proved even more difficult than anticipated. 2 SEALs carried Sarah on an improvised stretcher, while the others provided security, but their progress was painfully slow. Every shadow could conceal an enemy fighter, and every sound might alert insurgents to their presence. The team moved with practiced stealth, but they knew their luck could run out at any moment. Halfway to the extraction point, an insurgent patrol stumbled upon their route completely by accident. Harrison's point man spotted 3 armed fighters approaching their position and immediately signaled for the team to take cover. The SEALs found themselves trapped in a narrow alley with limited options for movement and a critically wounded Marine who could not be moved quickly or quietly. The firefight that followed was brief but intense. Harrison's team used suppressed weapons and coordinated fire to eliminate the insurgent patrol before they could alert other forces, but the sound of gunfire echoed through the narrow streets. Within minutes, they could hear vehicles starting and voices shouting as insurgent reinforcements began moving toward the sound of combat. With their position compromised, Harrison ordered his team to abandon stealth and move quickly toward the extraction point. They carried Sarah at a run through twisting alleyways and over rubble-strewn streets, while insurgent forces converged on their location from multiple directions. Radio chatter filled with urgent calls for the helicopter to begin its approach immediately. The helicopter pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Maria Santos, had been monitoring the rescue operation from her position outside the city. When she received Harrison's call for immediate extraction, she didn't hesitate to fly directly into insurgent-controlled airspace despite heavy ground fire. Her crew chief prepared the aircraft for a combat rescue, while door gunners readied their weapons for the inevitable firefight. Sarah regained consciousness briefly during the chaotic evacuation, opening her eyes to see Navy SEALs carrying her through burning streets while bullets whined overhead. The scene seemed surreal, like something from a war movie, but the professional calm of her rescuers gave her hope that she might actually survive this ordeal. She tried to speak but lacked the strength to form words. As they approached the landing zone, Harrison could see muzzle flashes from insurgent positions in surrounding buildings. His team would need to suppress enemy fire long enough for the helicopter to land, load Sarah, and take off again. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, and any delay could result in the aircraft being shot down or damaged beyond its ability to fly. The final sprint to the extraction point became a desperate race against time and overwhelming odds. Harrison's team laid down covering fire while Santos brought her helicopter in fast and low, ignoring the stream of tracers reaching up toward her aircraft. The rescue that had seemed impossible just hours earlier was about to become reality, assuming everyone could survive the next few crucial minutes. Chief Warrant Officer Santos brought her helicopter down in the small courtyard as insurgent bullets shattered windows and sparked off concrete walls around them. Her door gunners returned fire at muzzle flashes from surrounding buildings while Harrison's team sprinted across open ground, carrying Sarah on their improvised stretcher. The deafening roar of rotor blades mixed with automatic weapons fire created a symphony of organized chaos that would forever be etched in everyone's memory. The SEAL team loaded Sarah into the helicopter with practiced efficiency. Despite the ongoing firefight raging around them, the aircraft's medic immediately began advanced life support procedures, connecting her to monitors that showed just how close she was to complete organ failure. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, her heart rate irregular, and her oxygen levels barely sufficient to sustain life, but she was finally receiving the medical attention she desperately needed. Santos lifted off immediately once her passengers were aboard, climbing rapidly to escape the range of small arms fire. The helicopter's defensive systems detected multiple heat signatures from shoulder-fired missiles, forcing the pilot to execute evasive maneuvers that tested both her skills and the aircraft's limits. Flares deployed automatically to confuse incoming missiles, while the crew held their breath during the most dangerous moments of the extraction. During the flight to the trauma center at Camp Takadam, Sarah's condition remained critical but stable. The flight medic worked continuously to maintain her vital signs while radio ahead to prepare the medical team for her arrival. The list of her injuries was staggering: 17 bullet wounds, multiple infections, severe dehydration, blood loss requiring immediate transfusion, and early signs of kidney failure from the sepsis that had been attacking her system. Lieutenant Commander Harrison remained with Sarah during the flight, holding her hand and talking to her even though she was unconscious. He had seen many wounded warriors during his career, but her determination to survive against impossible odds had impressed him deeply. The fact that she had remained hidden and alert for 3 days with such severe injuries spoke to a level of mental toughness that even seasoned special operations personnel found remarkable. The trauma team at Camp Takadam had been alerted about Sarah's condition and was prepared for her arrival. Surgeons, nurses, and specialists worked together in a coordinated effort to save her life, performing multiple operations over the following week to repair damaged organs, clean infected wounds, and restore proper blood circulation. At several points during her treatment, medical personnel wondered if she would survive, but Sarah's fighting spirit proved stronger than her injuries. News of Sarah's rescue spread quickly through military channels and eventually reached her family in Phoenix. Her parents, who had feared the worst when they were initially notified she was missing in action, experienced overwhelming relief when informed she had been found alive. The reunion would have to wait until she was stable enough for transport to a military hospital in Germany, but knowing she was alive was enough for now. Staff Sergeant Thompson visited Sarah as soon as she was conscious enough to receive visitors. The guilt he felt about leaving her behind had been eating at him for days, despite knowing he had made the only tactically sound decision possible. Sarah squeezed his hand weakly and told him she understood, thanking him for ensuring the rest of the squad made it out safely. Their conversation was emotional for both Marines, representing a form of closure that military personnel rarely experience. The story of Sarah's survival and rescue became legendary within military circles, inspiring other service members facing their own challenges in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her ability to remain hidden and alert for 3 days with 17 bullet wounds demonstrated a level of courage and determination that exemplified the best qualities of American military personnel. The Navy SEALs who rescued her were awarded various commendations, though they insisted they had simply done their job. Recovery was a long and difficult process that required months of physical therapy and psychological counseling. Sarah faced the challenge of learning to walk again, regaining full use of her damaged limbs and dealing with the emotional trauma of her experience. The support of fellow Marines, her family, and dedicated medical professionals helped her through the darkest moments of rehabilitation when progress seemed impossible. 2 years later, Sarah returned to active duty with her unit. Having made a complete recovery that amazed her doctors, she had requested to return to Iraq for another deployment, feeling she had unfinished business in the country where she nearly died. Her superiors initially resisted the idea, but her determination and excellent physical condition eventually convinced them to approve her request for continued service. The bonds forged during her rescue remained strong years later. Lieutenant Commander Harrison stayed in contact with Sarah, attending her promotion ceremony when she was advanced to sergeant. Chief Warrant Officer Santos invited her to her daughter's wedding, considering Sarah part of her extended military family. These relationships, born from shared danger and mutual respect, represented the brotherhood and sisterhood that defines military service at its finest. Sarah's story became a testament to the power of human resilience and the unwavering commitment of American forces to leave no one behind. Her survival against impossible odds inspired countless others facing their own battles, proving that determination and hope can overcome even the most desperate circumstances when combined with the dedication of those who refuse to abandon their fellow service members.